by the wardrobe just as Obinna entered. He didn't switch on a torch. He simply stood in the dark, his frame silhouetted by lightning from outside. In silence, he walked to the boy's bed and placed a single white flower on the side table. Then he sat on the edge of the mattress, buried his face in his hands, and wept. It was the first time she had seen him cry. Not the silent, dignified sorrow of a powerful man, but the raw, broken sobbing of a father who had lost everything and never healed. She watched from the shadows, her own breath catching in her throat. In that moment, he was no longer a stranger. He was just a man shattered by guilt. When he finally left the room, she remained behind the curtain until the first bird cried. Into the dawn. Only then did she step out. She looked once more at the photographs, then whispered to the walls, "I know now." That morning, Adaeze packed a small bag. She didn't say a word to anyone. She went straight to the hospital to see her mother. "You look tired," Mama Ifioma said, touching her cheek gently. "But your heart is strong." Adaeze smiled faintly, but inside, her soul was turning. She knew the truth now. And the man she had married was no longer just a mystery. He was the keeper of something tragic, and perhaps something unforgivable. Every step she took through the mansion echoed differently now. Every glance at Obinna held new weight. She had seen behind the curtain, into a room frozen in time, into a life buried beneath silence. For days, she avoided him. She ate alone, kept to herself. But the air between them had changed. And one evening, as the rain returned and the house hummed with its usual hush, she could no longer hold the silence inside her. She found him in the dining room, eating alone as always, seated at the head of a long mahogany table with more chairs than guests. She didn't ask permission. She didn't sit. She simply stood and spoke, her voice steady, low but firm. "I saw them," she said. Obinna didn't look up. "Your wife, your son, the room you never wanted me to see." Still, he said nothing. He placed his spoon down slowly. The sound of silver against china was the only reply. "I saw the articles, the toys, the frame. I saw who they were and what you lost." A long silence passed between them before he finally stood and walked to the window. "You had no right," he said softly, no rage in his tone, only weariness. "I had every right," she replied. "I'm your wife." Even if only on paper. He turned then, eyes darker than the evening sky. But his voice broke in unexpected ways. "Amarachi was the only woman I ever loved," he began. "Chisholm was my joy. They died in that fire while I was away. Or maybe not away enough. I should have been there. I should have stopped it. And when they were gone, everything else died with them." He walked back to the table, picked up his drink, and swallowed hard. "You were never meant to find that room. I didn't bring you here for company or comfort. I brought you here because the world was asking questions I no longer had answers for, and I needed a reason for them to stop talking." Adaeze's voice trembled now, not from fear, but from shame. "So I was just a mask? A story for your reputation?" "Yes," he said plainly, "but you've become something else." She didn't wait for him to explain. She left the room with a knot in her chest and tears she refused to cry. That night, she began packing her bag. She didn't know where she would go. She just knew she had to leave. She had survived loneliness, secrets, and silence, but she would not survive staying in a place where she was invisible. But fate, cruel and unpredictable, had other plans. At dawn, as the first light pushed through the window, she collapsed. One moment, she was brushing her hair. The next, she was on the floor, blood trailing from her forehead where it struck the sink. A maid's scream echoed through the house. She awoke in a private clinic hours later, her head bandaged, the room filled with the scent of antiseptic. The nurse smiled gently and said, "You're stable now, madam. But more importantly, congratulations. You're 2 months pregnant." The word rang in her ears like a drumbeat. She blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. Then a soft laugh escaped her lips, followed quickly by tears, laughter and crying, twins of confusion. Obinna visited. Eventually, he stood at the door, stoic. "You'll have the best care," he said. That was all. No joy, no apology, no warmth. She turned her face away from him and whispered, more to herself than to him, "This child is mine, and I will raise it with or without your name." He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He simply nodded and left. That night, Adaeze sat in the clinic garden under the stars, her hand resting on her stomach. She didn't pray for safety. She prayed for strength. "God," she said quietly, "you gave me this life. Give me the courage to protect it. Give me the wisdom to rise." She was no longer just a contract bride, no longer a shadow in someone else's story. She was a mother now, and for the first time since signing that paper, she knew she would no longer live in silence. Pregnancy did not slow Adaeze down. It woke something fierce inside her. She no longer walked like a stranger in the mansion. She walked with purpose. With her belly growing and truth burning in her chest, she began to see everything clearly. The house, the silence, the fear in the staff's eyes. She had seen the room. She had heard the whispers. But now she needed proof. Not for gossip, not for vengeance, for justice and for her child. So she went where few dared to go. Above a noisy provision store in Makola, she climbed a creaky staircase to a small door with a faded sign, "Aloyu Investigations." The office smelled of old case files and dust. A weary man with peppered hair and tired eyes looked up from his desk. "How can I help you, madam?" he asked. Adaeze placed a folded paper on his desk and looked him in the eye. "My name is Adaeze Obinna. I need to know what really happened 5 years ago to Amarachi and Chisholm." The man leaned back slowly. "That fire," he said, eyes narrowing. "That case was closed fast. Too fast," she nodded. "Because someone wanted it buried." He studied her, pregnant, determined, unshaking. Then he nodded once. "I'll help you, but this will not be easy or safe." And so it began. Aloyu moved like a shadow. He slipped into corners of the city where truth was traded quietly. Old police officers, dismissed domestic staff, gatekeepers who remembered what others wanted to forget. He tracked down Obinna's former driver, now selling spare parts in Apata. He found the retired maid who had vanished 2 days after the fire, now hiding under a new name in another town. She cried when she saw the photos. She wanted to run. The maid whispered. Amarachi begged me to help her escape, but she was trapped. Meanwhile, Adaeze lived life on 2 fronts. In the mansion, she played the silent wife, drinking tea, attending antenatal visits, speaking only when spoken to. But at night, she wrote in her notebook every clue, every date, every new detail Aloyu sent her way. In her room, she hid a growing folder beneath baby clothes in her wardrobe. The case unfolded slowly. First came the fire report altered. The official reason listed was faulty wiring, but the technician's original notes had been scratched out and replaced. The generator, it turned out, had been tampered with. Then came Amarachi's old letters to her sister, sent from a secret email account. In them, she described sleepless nights, threats, isolation, and her belief that her husband was no longer the man she had married. But the final piece of the puzzle arrived like thunder. A neighbor's son, years ago, had been playing with his father's camcorder outside when the fire began. That innocent birthday footage had captured something unexpected in the background. A shadowy figure locking the compound gate minutes before the smoke rose. The beads on his wrist were unmistakable. Red coral, identical to the ones Obinna wore every single day. Adaeze watched the video with trembling hands. Her breath caught. Her chest pounded. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what they buried. This is what she died with." She and Aloyu gathered everything. Printed stills, matched signatures, verified timestamps. And when the file was ready, she made 3 copies. One she hid. One she sent to her cousin Chenier, a journalist with a sharp pen and a strong platform. And one she sealed in a brown envelope and hand-delivered to the local police station. No name, no return address. Just evidence. Chenier called within the hour. "Ada, this is explosive. Are you ready for what comes next? Adaeze closed her eyes and held her stomach. I'm not ready, she said, but I'm not afraid. That night, she sat by her window, watching the wind dance through the trees. She whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for light, for Amarachi, for Chisholm, for every woman too afraid to speak. The truth was no longer a secret. It was a sword, and Adaeze had just unsheathed it. Truth has a strange way of rising. It doesn't knock loudly. It seeps into cracks, builds slowly, then erupts. And for Chief Obinna, the truth had arrived. It came not in thunder, but in the quiet power of evidence. Adaeze didn't shout, didn't threaten. She simply acted. She had made her move, and now the storm was no longer hers to carry alone. 3 days after the files were delivered, silence swallowed the mansion. Obinna remained unaware. He moved through the corridors with his usual stiffness, unaware that the ground beneath him was beginning to shift. Then, at 7:43 a.m. on a Thursday, black SUVs pulled up at the mansion gates. No sirens, no warnings. Just the quiet terror of plainclothed officers stepping out with sealed court orders in their hands. From her bedroom window, Adaeze watched as the gates opened and boots met marble. Obinna appeared at the top of the stairs, confused at first, then calm. He adjusted his agbada as if dressing for a meeting and walked down slowly. You people know who I am? He asked, voice even. The officer replied without blinking. Yes, that's why we're here. Cameras clicked. Neighbors peeked from curtains. Phones buzzed across Ibadan. And by midday, the news was everywhere. Business mogul arrested in reopened arson. And homicide case. Shinny Air's report hit radio waves and websites within hours. Some readers were stunned. Others nodded, saying, we knew something was off. But amid the chaos, Adaeze stayed silent. She didn't seek celebration. She wasn't hunting fame. She just wanted truth to breathe. In court, the room was filled. To the walls, journalists, townspeople, elders, and distant relatives of Amarachi who had waited 5 long years for closure. Adaeze sat calmly, belly round, eyes steady. Obinna sat across from her, expression carved from stone. The judge was a woman firm, seasoned, and moved by reputation. The prosecution laid out every piece, the fire report, the hidden letters, video footage showing the gate being locked, the timeline, the red beads, the silence, the motive, the fear. Adaeze took the stand and spoke with no malice, no tears, just truth. I did not know him when I married him, she said. I signed to save my mother's life, but once I entered that house, I found voices buried in the walls, and I refused to let them stay buried. Obinna never met her gaze. His lawyers tried everything, called the evidence circumstantial, claimed the video unclear, the letters forged. But the room had already made its judgment. The law simply confirmed it. On the 6th day, the judge read the verdict. Her voice was steady, echoing like final thunder before calm. Chief Obinna, she said, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment for obstruction of justice, evidence suppression, and for being the primary suspect in the deaths of Amarachi and Chisholm Obinna. As Obinna was led away, handcuffed and stripped of status, Adaeze simply bowed her head. She did not feel joy, only peace. She placed her hand over her belly and whispered a prayer. You will never live in fear. You will never walk in shadow. The mansion gates were sealed. The compound, once known for secrets and silence, now bore a different name in whispers. Adaeze's house, where truth finally found air, where a woman's voice shattered chains without raising it. She had entered that house as a bargaining chip, but she emerged as a vessel of justice, a voice for the voiceless, and a symbol of what happens when even the softest whisper refuses to stay quiet. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a long time, Adaeze could breathe without flinching. And then came life. In a small maternity clinic, tucked away from flashing cameras and heavy stairs, Adaeze gave birth to a baby boy. He entered the world just before dawn, wrapped in silence before crying out, a cry so full, so forceful, that even the midwife paused and smiled. She named him Ifeanyi Chukwu. Nothing is impossible with God, His eyes, wide and searching, mirrored hers. His tiny fist gripped her finger, like he already understood the fight she had endured to bring him here. When Mama Ifioma saw him, for the first time, she broke into tears that shook her shoulders. "You were born from fire," she whispered as she cradled him, "but you'll never burn." She rocked him gently, singing lullabies passed down from mothers who had survived their own storms. The past had broken them, yes, but the present held healing. Adaeze didn't go back to her old job. Her name had already traveled beyond the streets of Ibadan. Women began reaching out, some openly, some in secret. They spoke of pain, of silence, of men like Obinna and marriages that were cages. They said, "You gave us courage," and Adaeze listened, because she knew their voices. She had once lived their silence, so she made a decision. She returned to the mansion, not as a prisoner, not as a bride, but as something entirely new. She unlocked the gates, not for herself, but for others. She took the house that once buried Amarachi's voice and turned it into a sanctuary for women who had nowhere else to go. She called it the Amarachi Center, a name that would no longer be whispered in sorrow, but spoken in strength. And Adaeze? She became more than a founder. She became a symbol, not of perfection, but of transformation. She was invited to conferences, churches, even national broadcasts. And every Sunday, Adaeze lit a candle at the gate, one for Amarachi, one for Chisholm, one for every woman who never got to tell her truth. They once called her a contract wife, a placeholder, a girl desperate for money. But in the end, Adaeze became something else entirely. She became the voice, the memory, the legacy. Some say power lives in loud voices, woman who refuses to be broken, in the mother who chooses to speak after years of silence. Adaeze's journey began with desperation, a daughter trying to save her dying mother. But what began as a sacrifice became a story of rebirth. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you once were, then don't leave quietly. Subscribe to this channel for more true African stories that move the soul and honor the strength of our people. Click the bell icon so you never miss the next voice that needs to be heard. Next week, we bring you a story of betrayal, faith, and redemption. The maid who saved her madam from a cursed marriage. You won't want to miss it. Until then, may your voice never be silenced. May your scars remind you not just of what you've been through, but of what you've survived. And may your story, like Adaeze's, live on not as a wound, but as a witness. I am the voice of Adaeze, and this was her story.